오케이, 그리고 cohort보다 밑에 있는 단위는 century였어요. 오케이, 근데 century 항상 100명 아니었어요. 오케이, 크게 왔다 갔다 했고 항상 100명 안 됐어요. 항상 뭐 70명, 80명 그 정도였어요. 그리고 century를 이끌어갔던 사람 이름이 뭐였어요? 그 정치? centurion. Okay. Okay, so centurions in the Roman military culture died much more often than the normal recruits because they always had to fight the most ferociously. Okay, centurions always had to lead from the front, so they would always be in the fighting. If their men were afraid, they would go first. So they died a lot more often than other people, but their rank was higher. But the ratio of their deaths to common soldiers' deaths was much higher. Okay, so if you look at in the old Roman military movies, they have a different hat. Okay, usually they have some feathers that go this way. It's called the transverse crest. Okay, and that was what a centurion was. And also, they wore their sword on a different side. The normal soldiers, I think, wore it on this side. Centurions had their sword on this side. Okay, but it was just a low-level officer, centurion. But if they survived, they could move up. Okay, but they very rarely survived. Many of them died. So century and centurion. So everybody knows 100년간 is century, right? A century. And also this 백인조, this group of 100 men, is also called a century. Now what else? What else is this centurion? Centimeter, right? centimeter 여기서 왔어요. Okay, cent. 또 미국 돈에서 cent 있잖아요. cent은 한 달러에 몇 개 들어가요? 100개. Okay, so cent. Okay, centimeter and cent and century. All right, now let's move on to the next one. Gladius Hispaniensis is the full name of the sword, but Gladius is good enough. Now maybe you've seen that movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe. Okay, Gladiator 검투사이라는 의미지만 원래 검의 이름은 Gladius였어요. 그 단어에서 왔어요. Okay, you know how in English if you put or in the end of something, it means person a lot of times, right? 자, 사, 사람, 가, right? So gladiator was 그 검 들고 있는 사람, right? So Gladius was the name of the sword. Gladiator was the name of the person who used the sword in the arena. Alright, gladiator. So if you look at the example sentence, that boxer fights with the bloodlust of a gladiator in the arena. So 치열하게, 정말 치열하게 싸운다는 의미죠. And I think I mentioned it in the post there, but this gladius that the Romans used, they would always borrow customs from new countries. So they used to use different swords. But one time, in one battle, they were fighting in Spain in maybe 300 or 200 BC. Well, I'm not really sure. But they were fighting in the region of Spain. And those tribes in that area used that sword. And they copied it. Then they started using it. Okay, and it was shorter than other swords. Like when they fought the British, the people who lived in England at that time, they used much longer swords and they were much taller than the Romans. The Romans were short, but the English people were much taller, so were the Germans, much taller, and they used much longer swords. But the Italians, the Romans, used this short sword called the Gladius, and it was effective because if you have a shield and you're blocking your opponent, if your sword is too big, you can't attack around the shield. But if your sword is short, you can attack quickly around the shield and also move quickly. So the Germans would pick up a big sword like this and to, slam it down, but the Roman soldiers would move quickly and kill them. So that was a very effective sword that they adapted from the Spanish tribes. Okay, so next, bellicose. Oh, standards 해야죠. Okay, we'll come back to that. Standards. Okay, so like we were talking about before, 고대 로마에서 standard이라는 것은 분기였어요. Okay, a flag, a kind of flag sometimes it was just made out of silver. It was a silver eagle at sometimes. Okay, sometimes it was a flag. And you know, Rome was consisted of two main eras, okay? When it was a republic and when it was an empire. So the first emperor, the first official emperor of Rome was Augustus, the nephew of Julius Caesar, okay? And then it switched to 그 제국 시대로 바꿨어요. 근데 그 전에 공화국이었어요. Okay, originally Rome was ruled by a senate, okay? Senate. And people would vote on things. It was more democratic. But then after Julius Caesar, he turned power over to his nephew Augustus when he died, and then Augustus became an emperor. Okay, and then the country switched to an empire. But in the early years, there were many standards. One was a dragon. They had one that looked like an Oriental-style dragon, and they had one that I think they had a wolf, because you know wolf was important in Roman culture. And they had the eagle. But then later on, they just only switched to the eagle. They only had one standard later on, it was the eagle. Okay, so standard이라는 게 원래 그거였어요. 지금 기준이라는 의미로 쓰잖아. Okay, so for example, 그 여자가 눈이 너무 높아. 그러면 she has high standards이라고 합니다. Okay, her standards are too high. 그런 식으로 쓰시면 돼요. Her standards are so high. 그리고 조건이라는 의미로 많이 쓰죠. Okay, 기준. Alright, bellicose. Okay, 라틴어에서 bellum'이라고 하면은 전쟁이라는 의미입니다. Okay, so 미국 역사에 대해서 얘기할 때 이런 시대에 있었어요. Okay, antebellum이라는 시대에 있었어요. 우리 국사에, 미국 역사에서. ante이라고 하면은 전에, 전쟁 전이라는 의미예요. Okay, so this means 우리 내전 일어나기 전에 가리키는 단어, antebellum. Okay, 근데 딱 보면은 전쟁 반대하는 거 같죠? 근데 이거는 anti예요, anti 아니에요. 의미는 달라요. 여기 같은 경우. Okay, antebellum. Okay. And so let's look at the example sentence. Many American liberals criticized the Bush administration's tone in foreign policy as overly bellicose. So 호전적, 전쟁을 지나치게 좋아하는 사람들. You could say it's bellicose. He's bellicose. His tone is bellicose. 싸움을 좋아하는 사람, bellicose. 오케이, 그리고 여기 마지막으로 triumph이라고 오늘날의 이거 성공, 대성공이라는 의미로 많이 쓰죠. 오케이? 근데 옛날에 개선식이었어요. 개선식 중에서 제일 좋은 거, 제일 높은 거. Okay? So there was a triumph. There was also something called an ovation. Okay, an ovation was the next step down. The triumph was the best thing, but ovation was the next step down. 이것도 쓰죠? Standing ovation, right? When you go to a concert and everybody stands up and claps, that's called a standing ovation. So now this is used in the sense of congratulating somebody. He was given an ovation, right? He was giving a standing ovation. Triumph. So Julius Caesar, he went all the way up to England, right? And he was the first Roman general to get into England. So he put his troops on boats and went across the channel, landed in England and fought, and then came back. He came all the way back to Rome, and then he celebrated a triumph. Okay? He celebrated a triumph. And when he came back to Rome, and like it says there, the general would be pulled by 4 white horses on a gilded carriage, a carriage covered with gold. Okay? And often he would have a slave that stood by him, and the slave would hold laurel flowers, like a crown, like 후광, 이런 동그랗게 된 거 여기 이렇게 위에 해놓았어요. And then sometimes they would say that the slave would tell the general, "You are not a god. You are not a god," in his ear as they went along, so that the general wouldn't be too conceited and start to believe he was a god. Okay. So what color was it that represented royalty in Rome? What color? 그 왕을 임금을 그 대표하는 색깔. Purple. Purple였어. Purple였어. Okay, so donning the purple means 왕 위에 올라가는 거. Donning means 입다. So 보라색 입었다. 이라고 하면은 왕 됐다는 의미예요. 영어로. Donning the purple. Okay, so purple. Julius Caesar started to wear a toga that had a stripe of purple on it. And people like Brutus and the other people who were Republicans, who believed in democracy, that Rome should be a republic, were against this, right? So it was a really scary sign, some said, when Julius Caesar donned the purple. Then they started planning his assassination, right? And then he was killed. Okay, so triumph. Yeah, like we talked about before, a successful product can be a triumph. A successful movie could be a triumph. So box office triumph, we can say what? 해운대 or 괴물. 괴물 was a box office triumph. 이라고 할 수 있어. Okay? The Toyota Corolla is the best-selling car in the world, right? So you could say the Toyota Corolla was a triumph, a great triumph. 이런 식으로 하면 돼요. Okay? The triumph of good over evil. 많이 쓰죠? Okay. All right. Any other questions? I'm gonna make another one, part 2. So like that one says part 1. I'm gonna make another one that's part 2 and post it later because this is something I'm personally interested in. All right. Good. Why don't we? What time is it? 55분.